Dislike the thought of your address, phone number, and your family's information being sold online? Imagine having your own private detective who scours the internet for data brokers selling your personal info. When they find it in the wrong hands, they help you take it back. McAfee Plus is just like that. A private detective helping you take control of your data and privacy. Get all-in-one protection with McAfee Plus and learn how to protect your everything at McAfee.com/podcast.
McDonald's presents Burger Reviews by Hamburglar. Today's review, the classic Big Mac, Hamburglar. Robble, robble. He said, there's more sauce in every bite. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Robble. Available at most restaurants in this area.
Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition, where we dive deep into the events and topics around the business of audio through the lens of the brands and buyers who support it. I'm your host, Jennifer Laine. In the Industry Edition, we go a little further behind the scenes to talk about the business of audio and the secrets of the craft, which allows brands and creators to impact audiences and culture through the work that they put into the world. If you've been listening to this podcast or play any role in the podcast industry, you're probably familiar with Podnews. If you're not, you should be. It's the industry's leading newsletter for podcasting, and James Cridland does a brilliant job of editing it into digestible stories available through podcast newsletter and on his site. Also, they recently acquired the Podcast Business Journal for a weekly look at the business of podcasting, so check that out as well if you're not already a subscriber. Today, we are offering our 6th installment of the Media Roundtable with Podcast Business Journal, featuring said editor, James Cridland. Welcome back to the panel, James.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking.
Spencer Semonson joins us today, media buyer at Oxford Road. Welcome, Spencer. Kyle Jelinek, Senior Director of Client Strategy, joins us.
Hello, happy to be here.
And rounding out the panel, we have Neal Lucey, EVP of Strategy and Product at Oxford Road.
It's great to be here. I'm excited that Kyle is on with us today.
Oh, now I have to bring it. Now I have to bring it. Okay.
You definitely do. You definitely do. Well, everyone, welcome to Industry News with Podcast Business Journal. James, what stories do you have that our chief audio officers need to be paying attention to? Anything you want to highlight, or shall I dive right into what we're looking to focus on this week?
No, I dive in. Why not?
Okay, well, this to me is the most interesting, because later in the show, we have a story about how the entertainment industry and podcast industry sort of are coming to a mutual agreement, but they have some tough questions to answer, some of which have been answered. But in Podcast Business Journal recently, you shared an interview with Alexia Badat, who is an entertainment lawyer. I'd love to dive into this a little bit deeper for our audience, especially around the section about IP ownership.
Yeah, I found it really fascinating. It was really interesting chatting to her. So she is an entertainment lawyer. She works for a big law company in New York, Claris Law. And I asked her, when contracts are signed around podcasting, what are the big mistakes that people make?
A big one is, if I don't own the IP, it's a bad deal. And digging your heels in, whether it's as the creator or the production company, and focusing solely on ownership of the IP and not taking a step back. There's ownership of the IP, there's control over the IP, and there's the beneficial interest, the economic interest in the exploitation of the IP. And you can often get to the same place you want to be as a creator, as a production company, by taking a step back and speaking to each of those in turn, rather than just focusing on owning it.
And I really liked that idea of just calming down on the whole IP discussion. She also talked about just asking questions. You know, when you're writing contracts, why does this matter to you? Why won't you concede on this? Why won't you allow me to change that particular clause? I thought it was a really interesting thing. It reminds me of a lawyer that I used to work with about 10 or so years ago. And she was one of those lawyers that didn't come up with entertaining reasons why we couldn't do anything. She came up with what were the risks of doing something that way. So really cool interview. It's well worth a read. You'll find it at podcastbusinessjournal.com.
How did you find her?
She is one of these lawyers who is excellent at self promotion. So she's very good at sending emails around and saying she was actually wanting to speak in a conference that I'm running in London, I think, at the end of next month, and that wasn't actually right. But actually, just talking to an entertainment lawyer that understands this space and particularly understands podcasting is really, really helpful.
Well, you didn't plug it, but in case anyone here is going to be in London next month, what's this conference, and should our audience attend?
I mean, if you're a chief audio officer and you're anywhere near London in the end of September, then it's Podnews Live, which is a conference that we are running. It's basically lots and lots of case studies, and it's a networking event more than a conference. So podnews.net/live is where to find more information.
I wish we could give a promo code, but you guys are going to have to pay full freight here. Sorry.
And I should point out, full price is about £40. So that's what, $60. I think if you're a chief audio officer, you can probably afford that anyway.
If you can expense it.
Yeah, exactly. And the flights and the hotel. That might be slightly more difficult, but still, there we go.
Well, we would love to be here. I know some members from our team are hoping to attend. So hopefully we'll be able to cover that in an episode you join us for in October.
Cool.
Okay, moving on. Another story that's sort of contentious that we'd like to discuss that was in your newsletter on Friday was the Glenn Beck story. So previously he was at Fox News. Now his podcast was removed from Apple Podcasts for a short time. He claimed he was being censored, but it was apparently a trademark issue. Apple had sent an email to Beck's company, which Beck either didn't receive or didn't read, but definitely didn't reply to. Can you walk us through the story with a bit more color? Was Honest History removed, or is this all just a PR stunt to get more followers to his Plays network? He was delivering a promo code after all.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's a PR stunt or not. So you mentioned Honest History. This was a new podcast that he was thinking about launching. And that new podcast, which he called Honest History, was fine, except there is a children's magazine called Honest History. And they own the trademark for audio recordings called Honest History, and was obviously a trademark issue. So what typically happens is that you, as the trademark holder, you email Apple and you say, hey, this show is misusing my trademark. So I've actually published the email that Apple sent to Glenn Beck, which I was sent by a source of mine. And you can very clearly say that it basically says, if you don't respond within 5 business days, we will take your show off. And Glenn Beck's team failed to respond within 5 working days, and they took the show off, basically. So not censored, just purely a trademark issue. Now, he should have known about this particular trademark because Honest History, the magazine, took Glenn Beck to court only 2 years ago because Glenn Beck owns honesthistory.com. And honesthistory.co wanted the .com. So he should have probably known about that. But I guess if your ideas are censored, then it means that your ideas are scary. And it's a great PR stunt for him. But it wasn't a censorship, so far as I can see. It's just purely a trademark thing. But more importantly, somebody in Glenn Beck's organization didn't see the email and certainly didn't reply to it. So the tip for any chief audio officer who's listening to this is make sure that you check the email address. You know, what email address has Apple got for you? Make sure that you're checking that, and make sure that you actually check the emails that come in, because who knows, they might be warning you of all kinds of things.
So I watched a piece by Glenn Beck, and from his perspective, what he was saying, it was one episode. So they could have just taken the one episode down, but they took 3,000 episodes down. And then I think he was saying that, and I'm not sure if this is true today, that they only restored, I think, like 2/3 of the episode, something along those lines. The other interesting thing I thought was, and I'd probably do this if I was in his shoes, he was promoting off of it. So he was promoting his Blaze TV and encouraging people to subscribe, and gave them a promo code and $30 off if you used his promo code to subscribe. So a good way to use the controversy, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can well see that. I would say that I think Apple does now have the ability to remove one particular episode, but I don't know whether Apple's legal team have that tool available to them, and I also don't know whether actually anybody in Apple Podcasts has that tool available. So technically it's possible, but actually we don't know necessarily whether Apple has that. I would say I don't think that Apple's entirely blameless here. Apple sent an email, and the email, when his show was taken off, his email said, "It has been taken off because of an issue." At the very least, they could have said, "Because you didn't reply to that email that we sent you 2 weeks ago." So I'm not sure that Apple's entirely blameless, but yeah, it's not a great story either way, I don't think.
Maybe we could change the name of this podcast to the Joe Rogan Experience to see like if we can stir up some controversy, get some people talking about us in the trades. I don't know. What do you guys think? A little bit, maybe?
It's worth a shot. It's worth a shot.
Let's try it. I don't know. Haley, put that in the notes. Let's talk about that.
Good luck with that.
This really helps with the whole civility score initiative we're looking to champion. Thanks, Kyle.
I just want to help.
All right. Well, let's talk about the upcoming Podcast Movement Conference. James, you're reporting live from the field, having already arrived in Denver. By the time our audience listens to this, many from Oxford Road will be joining you there, and many from our audience will be there as well. So I know we don't have a strong preview of what's to come, but James, any sort of foreshadowing on what we may see at the conference this week?
I mean, I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is a conversation with Steve McClendon, who is in charge of podcasting at Google and at YouTube. So we might learn a little bit more about what their plans are there. Google is very tight-lipped in terms of what some of their plans are. So it'd be nice to hear a little bit more plans from that. But I think also it's just a really good event to just take a bellwether on what the podcasting industry feels like right now. And actually, are we feeling happy and positive? The few conversations that I've had so far, most people are saying that advertising is coming back, or at least it's not going backwards anymore. And I think that that's great news. So it's a great time, I think, to take a bellwether on that, to see what people's thoughts are on the industry. And I'm, as we record this, the actual show hasn't started, although some of the previews have, and super looking forward to it over the next couple of days. I am sponsoring the puppies. So if you are here and you're listening to this in your downtime, then come and see the Podnews puppies, because lunchtime is playtime.
I believe James from our team is spearheading that on behalf of Oxford Road in attendance with the most enthusiasm.
Quite right.
Spencer, Kyle, past attendees, anything a first-time attendee should think about when going to a conference like this?
I've never been, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought you...
We might want to scrub that, but yeah, I've never been. I never get invited to these things because
You never made the cut?
I never made the cut.
Well, as someone who's been to a couple, let me give you some advice, Kyle. Let me give you some advice. Get in line for coffee early. There's always a bar open somewhere. And it's always 5:00 somewhere. And if you have an Oxford Road member there to talk in a panel, definitely attend those panels, because those are going to be the best of the entire event. And this year we have 3 Oxford Roadies speaking: Dan Granger, Miranda Romano, and Kristen Duenas. So if you are on site at Denver, please attend. They will be the best of the best. All promises.
So should they caffeinate before, or should they drink alcohol before those calls? I guess it sounds like that's the two things flowing.
It's attendees' choice.
Yes,
whatever they prefer.
To each their own. Okay.
And as Spencer is the queen of this, I will add, having been once, as much happens off the stage as happens on the stage. It's an excellent chance to rub elbows and get to know individuals in the industry, whether they're on the network side or on the brand side or on the agency side. Sort of everyone has a presence there. James, do you want to elaborate on this a bit more?
Yeah, I was just going to say the one exciting thing that most people are really excited about is that the hotel bar, firstly, is massive. Secondly, is open until 1 a.m. Oh, yes. Finally, somebody has listened to us. So I'm delighted about that. I mean, we are in the middle of nowhere. It's just fields next to us. I would call this an airport hotel, but the bar is massive and it's open until 1 a.m. It's going to be a good couple of days, although not necessarily too good for my liver.
Jennifer, our resident New Yorker, is probably thinking, that's when the night starts, right?
Yeah, 1 o'clock, so early.
Or stay open until 4.
I was actually going to politely let that slide, but yeah, Neal, you're not wrong. Not wrong. In Nashville, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, the situation was a little bit more bleak, where I think all bars at our hotel closed at like 8 p.m. And so people were going out sort of holding 2 or 3 drinks each because they knew the conversations would stretch further into the evening and wanted to make sure they were prepared. Okay. And now diving into some non-alcoholic industry news. Spencer, this week, Acast announced Podscribe as global preferred attribution partner. What does this mean?
So, Acast, being one of the largest international and dynamic publishers in the industry, it's a big deal, has announced that Podscribe is now their preferred attribution partner in all markets. And the most shocking tidbit in the Podnews press release is an announcement that starting in September, they will no longer accept new campaigns using Spotify's ad analytics. And this means that they will not be using anything that was previously entitled pod sites or chartable. In turn, Spotify released their own statement basically saying that Acast's decision will negatively impact advertisers and the openness of the current ecosystem. So I would say...
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, it's crazy how the people who benefit off of Pixels being under one umbrella are saying that it'll change for advertisers. They acquisitioned pod sites and Chartable last year, and we've been waiting for this buildup to happen ever since. They've kind of been quiet behind the scenes, and then they launched their big analytics dashboard, and they said, hey, all of your old campaigns are now under this, but there's no overlap and we're completely fine. And a lot of us internally have had our thoughts about what that means and what we would see. And I think we're finally seeing the fruition of that. Networks taking almost like a stand against it. And now they're working with Podscribe, which is all about transparency and openness in the marketplace. I'm sure all of us have a lot of thoughts about this. I'm going to start with Kyle, as an AD, and to the CAO. What are your thoughts on this?
I have a lot. Look, I really like the pod sites folks. Worked with them early on as they were developing this thing, long hours, going through this thing. As soon as Spotify purchased them, we were like, all right, well, let's see how it goes. And it's been fine. I like what they're doing. I like the innovations that they're putting out there. They shouldn't have changed it to SPA. We're calling it Spotify ad analytics. What do we call it even? Like, I don't know if that's even SPA, but I feel like they kind of they were under the radar when it was pod sites owned by Spotify. And now they're just like, we're SPA and you got to take it. And everybody's I think Acast is going to be the first of many, many networks that are going to pull out. So it's free. It's good. I like these folks, but I think we're going to see more and more networks saying like, nope, not going to do it.
James, I know you have an opinion here.
I mean, imagine if iHeartRadio was to just give you what they reckon their radio stations reach, and just give you their reckon of their radio station's audience. I mean, that would be madness, but that's essentially now what is going on here. Spotify for advertising, Spotify's ad analytics is basically marking their own homework here. And I think, Spotify made a statement saying that it would negatively impact the openness of the current ecosystem. Let me tell you what's going on here at Podcast Movement. There are lots and lots of open stands that you can go to, open booths. I've got one, Libsyn has one, Descript has one, et cetera, et cetera. Spotify has a room which is about 10 minutes walk away from the exhibitors hall, that the only people that can get in are those who have been invited to go in there. So for Spotify to be talking about the openness of the current ecosystem is quite mind-boggling.
I mean, this also coming from a company that won't even share transcripts. So the list is long in the ways this is not an open, where this is a very ironic statement.
I think did anybody not see this coming, that eventually publishers would say, maybe, just maybe, I don't want a Spotify pixel on my...
I'm surprised it took so long, frankly. And it seems to coincide with the name change, frankly. Like, oh, that's right. They're owned by these guys. We don't want to work with them anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And you could also argue that, of course, they could be using this data. We don't know whether they are, but they could be using this data to spy on their competitors so that they understand what's going on elsewhere. So it's a very strange thing. I mean, and we should point out that Acast is giving Podsights attribution for free to their advertisers. But you don't have to take it if you don't want to, because what Acast has also done is in each local market, they have chosen 2 or 3 attribution partners that you can use instead of the Podsights folks if you want to. And that's particularly important in Europe with GDPR and everything else. So, I think Acast is doing a good thing here. Certainly the conversations that I've had with other people here, they're basically saying we would like to shake Acast by the hand. Which is nice in comparison to 2 years ago when everybody wanted to shake Acast by the throat for some of the things that they were actually doing. So I think it's a really good thing for the industry that Acast has basically turned around and said, no, you don't get to mark your own homework in this way.
So is this the first domino to fall? And if all the dominoes fall and get behind Acast, what happens for Spotify?
Well, it's definitely the first of, there's other things happening. Like I was on a call with a network, I won't mention who it was, but they're planning to do the exact same thing. We'll probably talk about it in the next week or two. A very large network that's not going to be working with them in the near future. So I think one of the challenges for us is we don't want to have 7 different attribution partners for a particular account. So finding who we want to kind of lay that stake in the ground and say, this is an independent party that we trust that we're going to use. Podscribe seems really, really good. They seem to be kind of the forerunner right now, given their international capabilities and their willingness to kind of break ground and find ways to approach different challenges that we might have. But I think it still remains to be seen, like who's going to be the leader in this space moving forward. I don't know if it's going to be Spot. I don't think it will be, frankly, from what we're seeing.
Yeah, I don't know. They bought Podsights and they bought Chartable, and now they're giving it away for free. So maybe who knows? Like, will there be a write down in the future because of this? If people stop taking Podsights, we'll see.
Well, it seems as I'm digging in, it's kind of freemium. So you get basic services for free. And then if you want more, you can pay for it. Which I think you're going to see more and more of that come in with that service. But again, if we can't get the majority of the networks to work with them, it's kind of a challenge for us, because you don't want to aggregate 3 different pixel partners into one data source.
All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. You know, I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, you know, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
So, James, you mentioned Libsyn. I hope you stopped by their booth. But Neal, we have a story that you submitted about Libsyn, introducing predictive contextual targeting for enhanced podcast advertising precision and effectiveness. Bit of a mouthful. Do you want to unpack that for us?
This is a mouthful. I might start with the hot take and then work backwards, just because there seems to be a lot of news in planning and buying tools recently. So Co-Host has a new audience planning tool. Magellan has an audience planning tool. There's Edison, there's MRI. So Libsyn now has really more a buying tool for finding the right podcast. So I think it's, on the outcome side, it's welcome news because there's more technology available to be smarter about planning and buying your podcast campaigns. So that's kind of on the outside of it. It's a mouthful because the idea is they're introducing predictive contextual targeting. So it's offer precise and privacy-free targeting. It's a collaboration between AdvertiseCast and Julep Media. It gives access to 500 million impressions. And then the last part I really need to read is the idea is the solution extracts the contextual essence of thousands of individual podcast episodes and accurately classifies content across hundreds of thousands of subcategories. So as a result of that, you can precisely target your ads to the right listeners based on those different content preferences. So sounds cool. It sounds like contextual targeting on steroids to me, but I think that's as much as I know about it, and I'd love to learn more about it. And I'm sure that Kyle and Spencer, kind of in their roles, would have a POV or thoughts on this as well.
Well, I'll start. Like, the best podcast planner is Spencer, and I mean, look, every time we get into the targeting, like, it all sounds great, but in practice, it rarely does what they say it's going to do. It usually comes with a high price tag, and I would put money on it that Spencer could put a better plan together than Libsyn's new system in his current state can do. I think we go head to head. Spencer, you put a plan together. Let's have the Libsyn plan, and let's do this because I know you'll crush it in its current state.
I mean,
in the future, it's really exciting.
No one will watch the Mark Elon cage match if this is happening, for sure.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Patrick Henry versus the machine. What are we doing here? Little bit. I'm kind of in the same headspace as Kyle. It sounds great for a specific client who, has scattershot tested and they just can't seem to figure it out, and they're deep diving on insights. I've done 5 insight reports this week just for my clients, and I can tell you finding those little grains of truth can be difficult. And when you figure it out, but you don't feel like you can scale appropriately, this sounds amazing. But we know that the host read works. We know that a plan that has effective CPMs, the right insertion type, frequency capping, not too much crossover with programmatic, those work the best. So this would really have to be a selective client and a selective plan. I'm not saying that it's just a no-go, because in a perfect world, we would have all those things and the networks would all stay in line and we would all shake hands and go about our merry way. But I will say it's not a one-size-fits-all for any client. It really depends on what you want to do, how you want to scale, and who you want to reach.
Well, and I wonder how much frequency of topic is really being weighed in here, because I feel like a lot of the contextual targeting tools we've worked with before, it doesn't go as deep into it as we hope. So we end up testing on a show that where it's been referenced before, maybe passively or maybe even out of context, or once we've seen where it's referenced in a live read and it followed through to the transcript. And so I don't know, James, you're obviously very familiar with this story as you shared it in your newsletter. What else should CAOs be considering when this is proposed to them as an option that they might want to consider?
Yeah, I think, it's nothing too different to what Acast is already offering in terms of contextualized targeting as well. And I quite like the idea of it might be a sports podcast, but they might be talking about a new Ford pickup. And so therefore, actually, an ad in there close to that topic that is talking about where to pick up a new Ford pickup is a good plan. So I think that there's certainly something there. I mean, also there was a story last week around a company called FlightPath. They're a yield analysis company for podcasts, and they're working together with Sounder. Sounder is doing contextual targeting and all of that kind of stuff. And what they basically said in their press release is, all of these targeting tools are really helpful to your point, Jennifer, if there are enough ad slots to advertise in. So what FlightPath is working on with Sounder is to basically say, okay, you've got all of these different things that are being talked about, but what is actually going to deliver you the numbers that you actually need? And I think that that's a little bit of the, interesting secret source there. I mean, I actually sat down with the CEO of Libsyn this morning, John W. Gibbons. I should call him the interim CEO because that's what he is. And the brand new CFO as well, who's called Chuck. And we were both, chatting. And what's very clear is that he now sees that company as being an advertising company rather than a podcast hosting company. That's where they've come from, but they're definitely moving into advertising as being their number one thing. And so it was great having a chat with him and seeing how all of that is coming out. And he sees possibly in 4 or 5 years' time, he sees podcast hosting being free because everything is predicated on the advertising side. So it was a good conversation over some horrible hotel coffee this morning. Which
hopefully you got to very early, so you didn't have to wait in line per Spencer's recommendation.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Yes. Yes. Get in line for the coffee. My goodness.
So long story short, will we see more of these tools pop up across the industry?
I think we will. What I'd love to see is more cross-publisher tools. So there are a few that are cross-publisher. But the more that we can look across publishers, I think the better informed we are in planning and buying our campaigns.
And now getting back to where we started this conversation, some interesting news as it relates to Hollywood. I know we've talked about the rise of celebrity podcasts, the fall of celebrity podcasts, but that's not this conversation. This conversation is how podcast isn't necessarily being caught in the crossfire of the SAG-AFTRA strike. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the strike going on, but for those who aren't, last month, the Screen Actors Guild joined the Writers Guild of America in a work stoppage. The coinciding strikes have slowed down show business as production has been halted across the major film and television industries. The potential ripple effects are significant, and we don't need to dive into those here. From our perspective, the interesting part is there was a press release that was shared last week stating that podcasts that operate under the SAG-AFTRA contracts are also free to continue, which is excellent news as many celebrities still have podcasts and are able to release shows. Where this gets a little complicated is if these shows have an interview format, there's a gray area as to how actors are able to appear on the show as they're not able to promote their TV or film projects. Also, if it's a scripted show, some fiction podcasts, for example, are restricted as they cannot be written. And furthermore, some podcast hosts are actually standing in solidarity with SAG-AFTRA and not accepting advertising from the film and television category right now. So lots to unpack here. So I first encountered this because I was listening to a podcast in the lead up to the Barbie movie release. Podcast I generally listen to, not listening to it just because of Barbie, but they interviewed Margot Robbie and they were really adamant about saying that the interview took place before the strike had happened. And I thought that was a little bit peculiar as I think the episode was released on the first day of the strike and I wasn't completely familiar with what was going on yet. But I don't know. I mean, do you think that we will see another rise in celebrity podcasts, seeing as how this is obviously a great opportunity for revenue when you have a bit of a down peak in industry activity? Also, you might be a little bit bored and there's tons of people to talk to, but also the conversations currently being had have to be very, very carefully orchestrated. So who else has a take here? I don't really have a take. I just am more dumbfounded by how they're able to do it, but they're not able to do it. And everyone has to be really careful.
We are going to see more celebrity podcasts. It's going to happen. I, for one, am very excited. I want to know what Kate Hudson's brother's up to. I don't know what he's doing. I'm sure Uncle Joey has some really exciting things from the Full House days. He's going to unpack on a new podcast. I'm making it up. I don't know. They're always overpriced. They're rarely good.
Do you mean Uncle Jesse?
I was going for Uncle Joey, but
okay.
Uncle Jesse probably has a podcast as well. Like, listen, they're always overpriced.
Definitely.
Of course. They're generally overpriced. And for they don't work as well as podcasters. Like, here's a news flash. Like, podcasting right or in a good way that people actually like to jump in and listen to takes a different skill set than reading lines in a movie or what have you.
I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, Spencer, but would a show like Office Ladies still be able to record currently, as technically they're promoting The Office, but not in a way that's relevant to the current strike? Do we know what's happening? I'm going to look it up if you don't.
We actually have had a couple of networks come to us and say, based on the SAG-AFTRA's demands to influencers, there are pieces of work in progress that are affected. So if you have a rewatch podcast and the show's still on, or you're using the podcast to promote, it is affected. Office Ladies was a big one that we thought was going to be, and it has not been. Even though it is like the main thing keeping Peacock afloat, let's be real. It is still safe for the time being, thankfully.
James, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, and it has been reported that SAG-AFTRA are absolutely fine with rewatch podcasts, even though they are promotional. They're not in breach of the strike rules. So I guess there's that, which is a helpful thing.
Off the top of our head, media team, Spencer, account team, Kyle, strategy, Neal, James, industry guru. What are some celebrity success stories in podcast?
I think I have one. When we went to the IAB upfronts, they had a great panel from a couple of different podcasters, including Heather McDonald, who does Juicy Scoop from Sony. And she previously was a well-known comedian who worked with Chelsea Handler, and now does rewatch things with the Bravo universe. And she said that she basically had to restart her career as a podcaster. She had to build a following, create in-jokes, work on her social, and create a community. So there's actually multiple different social outlets for her fans to meet. And I have heard that from other actual like podcasters who work full time. They have their own Facebook groups. And sometimes it'll be like the podcast plus the crochet community, the podcast plus pet communities. And that's the kind of weird stuff you have to do when you're a podcaster. You're building a community and you're doing all of this extra work, and most celebrities, they don't want to do that work or be that personal with their fans. So it is interesting, like the ones who are more known to me as a podcaster than a celebrity are generally the ones doing much better in the space.
So to the CAOs out there, what advice do you have for sort of examining, testing a celebrity audience? Like what makes a celebrity show pass this sniff test?
I think the number one is look how many ads are in their mid-roll spots. How much space do you have up against programmatic and non-DR? How much time are they giving? Are they giving you a straight read? Are they going to do PE? And what's your share of voice? Because if you're only buying a very small amount of impressions on a larger celebrity podcast, it's a drop in the bucket. I'm not saying it's a complete waste of money, but you're basically trying to do a reach play when you're not having any reach. So you might as well spend it on a smaller show where they're actually going to take the time to do that read. Also look at how long the podcast has been going. If they're at it for years and they have a lot of DR advertisers, that's generally a better sign because they're more of a podcaster than they are full on celebrity. So people like Sarah Silverman, who has a small yet really unique following. Yes, she's like a big comedian, but she's doing that work. Mostly it's smaller comedians as well that you can pretty much adhere to.
Is it ever worth it to dive in on a big name for a first season?
It depends. Yeah, we've done it for tune-in value and for that has lent to good DR. Do you want to talk about that, Kyle, with your clients? I'm honestly dying.
I mean, I was going to add one thing outside from the third party analysis that you were talking about, looking at the share of voice and how many spots they have in a show. We have a huge amount of case studies internally. So we've tested a lot of that stuff. So we've had clients who have tested those big swings on the first season. Sometimes they win, sometimes they're terrible, but we've got the data on there. So oftentimes, you're mentioning, Spencer's going through Heather McDonald. I think about one, again, she's a podcaster. She is changed her career into podcasting. So she's no longer just a comedian. She's involving it. And I think those who really, Dax Shepard comes to mind. He is crushing. He's now a bigger podcaster than he's a movie star, but he's investing into the podcast. He's not relying on his name to do his podcast, which I think is the most important distinction.
Joe Rogan as well, of course.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Excellent.
Of course, maybe the
so
biggest.
Much so that I forgot he was ever he had a career before podcast.
Fear factor, right?
Yeah.
There's a really weird channel that only plays like repeats of Fear Factor on YouTube TV, and I get to see Joe Rogan with hair. It's fun. Good.
As a side note, Hallmark announced their first podcast, a new romance mystery entitled Crimson Hearts Collide. Kyle's already a subscriber. Neal, why do you think this is interesting to pay attention to?
Well, I thought it was
from a marketer's perspective.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I mean, they definitely highlighted the fact that they could do this because it isn't in violation of SAG-AFTRA guidelines. So podcast is a place that they can launch activity. I've bought a lot of television, and the Hallmark Channel surprises me, or has surprised me time and time again.
Find somebody who doesn't love the Hallmark Channel during Christmas time, and
Oh,
you can serial killer.
Yeah, I mean, it's the perfect title. It's like such a Hallmark title. Crimson Hearts Collide. Easy for me to say. So I mean, and then I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, people are into that channel. Why not go into podcasts? They have mysteries. Mysteries and fiction is a great segment of podcasts. So I think it's time, and I think that that their audience segment, which is a little bit older, is fairly underserved in podcasts. So this is an opportunity to grow that audience.
I'm just happy my mom will know what I do finally. Like, Mom, listen to this. You'll like it, and you'll hear the ads, and that's what we do. That's what I do. It'll be good. First time ever.
So I wonder, and James, maybe this is a you question. Is this them testing out a reverse Murders in the Building, where it starts as a podcast and then grows a huge audience and then potentially turns into a show where, with that built-in audience following them all the way through? Or do you think this is just a one-stop shop where they start with this podcast? If it goes well, they have other podcasts. Is this like a bigger deal?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess, we won't necessarily know. It's interesting that they are doing this as a scripted podcast. It's interesting that they're doing this as part of their sub-brand as well. I just find it, it is their first scripted podcast ever. So I think, let's hope that it's successful and that they pile a little bit more cash into this, into this stuff as well, because, I think that would make an awful lot of sense.
What other podcasts have done it? I know, like, Dirty John did it. Like, that started as a podcast and then became a TV show or a movie. Was there anybody else that did that transition in the reverse like that?
Yeah, there are quite a few shows which have made it from podcast onto TV as well. There's an example, for example, here in Australia of a great show which is on the ABC and on the CBC in Canada called Stuff the British Stole, and it's all about things that the British have stolen and put into their museums, and people want them back, and that was made into a TV documentary. It's great show. It's highly recommended. So I think that sort of thing happens, but I don't think it happens as much as we think it does. And I think the large amount of money that was piled into podcasting a couple of years ago was because people saw this as being a cheap way of playing around with IP to work out what works, what doesn't, so that they can turn it into TV shows. And that doesn't seem to be happening really.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Spencer, Kyle, Neal, would you test? Are we buying commercials?
I'll test it. I'll test anything. How expensive is it? What's the CPM? Let's go. We'll try it.
And on that cliffhanger, thank you everyone for joining this week. James, always love having you. Can't wait to have you back for the full podcast movement recap and touch upon your upcoming show in London, which I'm sure our audience has already bought their tickets to attend. Kyle, Spencer, Neal, always a pleasure. And thank you for joining. Hope to see you again very soon. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges instead of burning them, and to raise above our differences and show that collaboration is possible when we treat each other with respect. If you're a marketer looking to align with our vision, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you to our guests, to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.
Tired of getting sketchy texts? Imagine having a lie detector that scans your text, email, and social media for risky links, alerting you to scams before you click. McAfee Plus is just like that. Stop scammers in their tracks before they get to you and your personal data. Learn about living a more secure and private life online with McAfee Plus. And learn how to protect your everything at McAfee.com/podcast.